Good afternoon, you're watching A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani. Now let's take a look at today's top stories. First, the US tells Iran to reopen Strait of Hormuz or it will obliterate its power plants. US and Ukrainian officials are holding peace talks in Florida as fighting continues. And Kazakhstan receives the full technical expert data for the Azal plane crash investigation. First, US President Donald Trump posted on his social media site Truth that the US will obliterate Iran's power plants if the Strait of Hormuz is not open before a 48-hour deadline. In response, Iran warns it will retaliate against all US-linked energy infrastructure in the Middle East if its power plants are attacked. Here's more.
Iranian missiles struck southern Israel, injuring dozens. Iran said it targeted military installations, while Israeli officials described the attack as a significant escalation, marking the first use of long-range missiles in the war. Speaking at the scene, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's Minister of National Security, called for continuing the fight to achieve victory.
I came to strengthen. I came to embrace the residents over here. The people of Israel, thank God, are strong. They are trying to harm us, but we remember one thing. We are at war. This is a war. We must continue to crush, to achieve victory.
More than 2,300 people have been killed since the start of the war, most of them in Iran. Lebanon reports around 1,000 deaths. On Saturday, hundreds of people marched in central Madrid to protest the ongoing war in the Middle East, holding banners and chanting slogans against US President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
I'm demonstrating against Trump, European Union and this government politics because we don't want more wars, we don't want more invasions. It's enough.
I'm worried because this can evolve into a nuclear conflict. Because let's imagine Israel may be losing this war, along with the United States. So it's possible they have a violent reaction and things to evolve into a nuclear war.
Earlier, US President Donald Trump threatened to obliterate Iran's power plants if Tehran does not fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours. Iran's Unified Combatant Command warned that in case of attack on fuel and energy infrastructure, all US energy infrastructure in the region will be targeted.
US and Ukrainian officials held peace talks in Florida on Saturday, with more discussions planned through the weekend as the fighting continues. Now, US envoy Steve Witkoff described the discussions as constructive. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said the key issue is whether Russia is ready to move toward ending the war. Meanwhile, several people have been killed in attacks on both sides. Ukrainian officials reported deaths in Zaporizhia and power outages in Chernihiv region, while Russia authorities say people were killed in shelling in the Belgorod region. Now, the Russian strikes have left parts of Ukraine without power, and Ukraine's president said repair work is underway, and talks with the US focus on security guarantees and a post-war economic recovery plan.
In the morning, I spoke with Prime Minister Sviridенko and Energy Minister Shmyhal about the situation following Russian strikes. There were significant power outages in the Chernihiv region. Part of the region is currently without electricity. Repair works are ongoing. There was also a repeated strike. Nevertheless, all necessary forces for restoration have been deployed. I want to thank everyone working for the people and to restore electricity. In Zaporizhia, repair works are also ongoing after a strike on an energy facility, and supply is expected to be restored. There were strikes in the Sumy region, the Dnipro region, Donetsk region, and our Kharkiv region. Wherever needed, units of the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, emergency and repair crews, and municipal services are operating. Everyone is working, Our team is currently in the United States. A meeting has already taken place today. From the American side, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. It is important for all of us in the world that diplomacy continues and that we are trying to end this war, Russia's war against Ukraine. No one needs this war. The teams will continue communication tomorrow. The most important thing is to understand how ready the Russian side is to move toward a real end to the war and whether they are prepared to do so honestly and decently, especially now when geopolitical tensions have only increased due to the situation involving Iran. A detailed report from the team will follow.
US President Donald Trump has threatened to send immigration officers to US airports across the country as a political row over funding continues. In a post on Truth Social platform, Trump said agents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, could be deployed as early as Monday. He said they would take over security and carry out what he called the immediate arrest of undocumented migrants, with a focus on people from Somalia. The threat comes during a partial government shutdown, which has left thousands of airport security staff working without pay. Democrats have refused to approve funding for immigration enforcement unless there are major reforms to how ICE operates. Now, turning to Cuba, and more than 10 million people have had power cut to their homes and businesses across the country. Its national grid collapsed for the second time this week. Cuba's energy ministry posted on social media a total disconnection of the national electrical system has occurred, and added protocols for restoration are already being implemented. The Caribbean country has suffered 3 major blackouts this month after the Trump administration cut off foreign oil imports required to keep power stations running. Last week, US President Donald Trump suggested there could be a friendly takeover of Cuba, later remarking it would be an honor. Staying on Cuba, its president says the country is preparing for the possibility of US aggression following a series of strong statements from US President Donald Trump. Here's what he had to say.
Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel has said the country is preparing for possible US aggression. The comments come after US President Donald Trump said all possible pressure had been applied to Cuba and that the only option remaining was to take over and destroy everything. Since returning to the White House, Trump has made clear his desire to change Cuba's leadership. He has also threatened tariffs on goods imported into the United States from any country that supplies Cuba with oil. The Cuban leader said the country has launched a defense preparation plan, which he described as defensive rather than aggressive.
The President of the United States, in one of his statements, exclaimed that we have applied all possible pressure on Cuba. They are acknowledging that they have blockaded us and that they have applied a policy of maximum pressure. How can they say that the blockade is our invention if they themselves are saying it? And in a second part of that statement, he says the only thing left for us is to take the place and destroy everything. First of all, we recognize that there could be an aggression against Cuba, and we have unleashed a preparation plan to raise our people's readiness for defense in the interest of the war of all the people, which is our defense concept and which is a defensive conception, not aggressive, and to defend the country with the preparation and the preparation of all the people in defense.
Cuba acknowledged a week ago that it had entered talks with the US government as an oil blockade imposed by Trump pushes the communist-run nation deeper into economic crisis and causes nationwide power outages. Residents in parts of Havana have lined up to collect water from tanker trucks as a new shortage hit neighborhoods in the capital. Officials say regular water supply operations have been affected by a lack of electricity. However, despite talks with the US, the island has rejected any suggestion that its political system or the term of its president are subject to negotiation.
A sharp rise in oil prices has driven by the ongoing conflict in the Middle East is placing growing pressure on the global aviation industry. Major airlines are being forced to cut flights and increase fares as fuel costs surge. The situation is expected to have a direct impact on both passengers and international air travel.
Amid the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, a sharp rise in oil prices is beginning to take a significant toll on the global aviation industry. Several major airlines have announced reductions in scheduled flights as they attempt to manage mounting operational costs. The chief executive of United Airlines, Scott Kirby, stated that the company plans to cut its capacity by approximately 5% during the second and third quarters of 2026. He warned that if fuel prices remain at their current elevated levels, the airline could face an additional $11 billion in annual fuel expenses. Air New Zealand has already taken action, confirming it will reduce around 1,100 flights by early May 2026. This represents roughly 5% of its domestic and international services and is expected to affect about 44,000 passengers. Similarly, Scandinavian Airlines has announced plans to cancel nearly 1,000 flights in April 2026. In Asia, authorities in Vietnam have urged the local aviation sector to prepare for potential flight reductions, citing increasing risks of aviation fuel shortages. Industry analysts note that fuel remains one of the largest operating costs for airlines. Recent market data indicates that benchmark oil prices have surged from around $85 to $90 per barrel to between $150 and $200 in recent weeks. In response to these pressures, several carriers, including Qantas, Air France, KLM and Air India, have introduced fare increases or higher fuel surcharges across a number of routes.
Now to France, and demonstrations against police violence and systematic racism took place in Nanterre, near Paris. Protesters are demanding justice for a teenager, Nahel Merzouk, who was killed by police gunfire in 2023. Here's more.
Thousands gathered in Nanterre, France, on Saturday to protest police violence and demand justice for Nahel Merzouk, the 17-year-old killed by police gunfire in 2023. Protesters assembled in front of Joliot-Curie High School before marching to Nelson Mandela Square. Participants carried signs reading "Justice for Nahel and all victims of police violence" and "In a country of human rights, the police are killing." Slogans such as "No peace without justice" and "From Nanterre to Gaza, we will not be silenced" were chanted throughout the march. The rally included pro-Palestinian supporters who unfurled a banner reading "Israel, a laboratory for police violence." A police officer fatally shot 17-year-old Nahel Merzouk, a youth of Algerian descent, during a traffic stop in Nanterre on June 27, 2023, after he reportedly ignored orders to stop. In March 2026, a court ruled that the officer would stand trial for using violence without intent to kill.
Now to some colour, and in the US city of San Francisco, thousands of people lined up around Union Square for hours on Saturday for the opportunity to pick tulips during the 2026 American Flower Bulb Day, also known as Tulip Day. More than 80,000 tulips were on display to be given out, with a rainbow of colours donated by Dutch growers. Visitors were invited to walk through the field and collect flowers with a limit of 8 tulips per person. Large crowds filled the area throughout the day, and organisers encourage visitors to be patient and mindful of those waiting behind them. Now let's take a look at the major stories from the region. And we head first to Kazakhstan, and Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has announced a high-level summit of leaders from the Organization of Turkic States set to take place in mid-May in Turkestan. He called on his government to prioritize preparations, noting the city's historic role as a political center of Kazakh Khanate. Tokayev also urged countries involved in conflicts to stop attacks on civilian and economic targets and move toward dialogue, adding that Kazakhstan is ready to host peace talks while not seeking a formal mediation role. The investigation into the crash of an Azerbaijan Airlines passenger plane that killed 38 people is now entering its final stage. Authorities say both the criminal and technical probes are nearing completion as international investigators work to determine what happened to the flight carrying 67 people on board. Here's what we know so far.
The investigation into the crash of an Azerbaijan Airlines passenger plane in Kazakhstan, which killed 38 people, is now entering its final stage. Authorities say the criminal probe is nearing completion, with Kazakhstan's Prosecutor General's office currently awaiting additional questions from the Russian side. That's according to Deputy Prime Minister Kanat Bozumbayev. At the same time, a parallel technical investigation led by the Ministry of Transport is expected to be completed in the coming months. Officials say the final report will clearly outline what happened to the aircraft, when it was struck, why it lost control, and which systems were affected. Investigators have already collected key evidence, including data from equipment manufacturers and GPS tracking systems. The findings will now be consolidated and reviewed together with international partners. Experts from Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan and Russia are involved, along with representatives from Embraer and the International Civil Aviation Organization. The plane was flying from Baku to Grozny when it crashed in western Kazakhstan on December 25, 2024. There were 67 people on board, including 62 passengers and 5 crew members. 29 survived. Preliminary conclusions point to external physical and technical interference in Russian airspace over Grozny as the cause of crash. In October 2025, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the aircraft had been within range of Russian air defense systems. He stated that 2 missiles detonated near the plane during an attempt to intercept Ukrainian drones, which ultimately led to the disaster. Russia has said it's ready to provide additional information to investigators and to pay compensation to those affected. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A-News.
Now, Novruz is being celebrated across several regions, bringing communities together with music, dance and long-standing traditions. But in some places, the Spring Festival is unfolding against a backdrop of political change and regional tensions. Here's more on how people are marking the occasion.
Millions around the world celebrate Novruz, the Persian New Year, as a symbol of renewal and cultural identity. The festival marks the arrival of spring and is widely observed across the Caucasus, the Balkans, the Black Sea, Central Asia, and the Middle East. In Syria, Kurds mark the occasion with dancing, bonfires, and flag waving in Damascus and Afrin.
This is the first time in the history of Syria, in 2026, that Nowruz has been recognized by the new government, and we are very happy. All the Kurds are gathering now, and we will light fires and celebrate. We will hold a party and dance in the center of town, and we are very happy.
Across northern Iraq, residents in Erbil celebrated Nowruz and Ramadan despite official warnings against public ceremonies due to regional security tensions. In Iran, preparations for Nowruz were tinged with anxiety as markets in Tehran offered flowers and traditional items, while people remembered victims of recent attacks. Yet many Iranians expressed determination to celebrate the festival despite difficult times.
We will hold Novruz with more splendor, despite our broken hearts due to the events that have happened in our country.
In Azerbaijan, the holiday was marked with festive markets, live music, traditional costumes, handicrafts, and local cuisine in Baku, attracting thousands of locals and tourists. As usual, festivities stretch from Baku Boulevard to the Old City, where exhibitors and performers bring the spirit to life.
Here I personally showcase my handmade crafts. These bags, created under our national brand and decorated with traditional ornaments, are designed for nuts and candies. As you can see, everything from our clothing to our hats is made by hand by me.
In Uzbekistan, another festive ceremony was held in Tashkent at the new Uzbekistan Garden. Uzbeks celebrated with national dances, rope walking, and holiday sweets. This year, local schools and cultural groups performed special Nowruz shows, and visitors enjoyed traditional games and exhibitions showcasing Uzbek heritage.
Staying on the New Year celebrations, Uzbekistan's President Shavkat Mirziyoyev has used this festive season to highlight unity and cooperation, both across Central Asia and within the country. A News' correspondent is in Tashkent and brings us more.
The president of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, in his Nowruz address placed a strong emphasis on international cooperation, describing the holiday as a symbol of peace, friendship and dialogue between nations. He noted that for centuries, Nowruz has served as a spiritual bridge between peoples, a message that remains relevant in today's global context. Mirziyoyev reaffirmed Uzbekistan's commitment to strengthening regional ties, stating that Central Asian countries should act as a united voice to promote peace, stability and partnership across the region. At the same time, the president highlighted domestic priorities, noted that more than 130 nationalities living in Uzbekistan celebrate Nowruz together, a reflection of interethnic harmony and social cohesion. He also pointed to continuing efforts to strengthen Mahalla institutions, create jobs and support youth, describing the younger generation as key to country's future development. It is Sivira Jabbar, reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Now to something a little bit more tech-orientated, and humanoid robots have appeared in a traditional street procession in southern China, joining locals in a centuries-old folk ritual. The unusual mix of technology and culture drew much attention as the event unfolded in Jiayang.
Humanoid robots have joined a traditional Ying Laoye folk procession in Jiayang in southern China, combining modern technology with a centuries-old cultural ritual. The event, also known as a Wandering Gods ceremony, is usually held in the first or second month of the lunar calendar. Villagers carry deity statues through the streets accompanied by drums, gongs and firecrackers, praying for safety and prosperity. This year, robots dressed in traditional clothing took part in the procession alongside performers and locals. They marched through the streets as part of the celebration, drawing attention from crowds. At one point, one robot appeared to malfunction and was carried by participants, while others continued moving with the procession. The event reflects both the preservation of local tradition and China's growing use of robotics in public cultural displays.
Very interesting there. Well, that's your news update for now. I'll be back later this evening to take you through your next update, but make sure you stay tuned to A News for further news and information.